this video, we'll be looking at the export of data from the SurveyEngine software. You'll learn about how to download data from SurveyEngine, the formats and types of data, and how to link and use them for offline analysis. Once you've collected respondent data, you'll want to download that data for analysis. And for an example, we'll use a project on route choice that has demographic and other questions, as well as a choice experiment. We'll use our simulator to generate 100 respondents and then move to the data screen. On the data screen, you can see the current questionnaire data collected, scroll through it, and sort it by column. You can also download the data in Excel, CSV, and SPSS formats. We'll be focusing on the Excel format, which is, of course, widely used, and the Excel downloads also include the dictionary in a separate worksheet. But first, a word on the other formats. CSV is perhaps the most open format, as it's a text file with a special character separating the columns and a line break for the rows. It does, however, contain no metadata on field descriptions or categorical descriptions. CSV literally stands for comma-separated values, but in general just means a delimited text file. The CSV files downloaded in SurveyEngine use the tab character as a delimiter, and this is done as the comma is frequently used in open text input. SPSS is a popular commercial analysis package, and the SPSS download will include the correct labels for all fields and levels. SurveyEngine generates the following data for download. Firstly, the covariate data. This is all the data collected within the questionnaire, plus some additional metadata such as IP address and duration. Then there's the page timestamp data, and this includes the entry and exit times for each page in the survey in seconds from the start time. And then for each choice experiment, there's a separate file. And of course, each of these data sets can be linked by respondent ID. Let's go through each of these data files in some detail to show you how they might be used. We'll start by downloading the covariate file, then step through its structure and the fields. The first 10 fields are standard metadata and will appear in every covariate file download. And these fields are RID, the respondent ID. It also represents the order in which respondents arrived in the survey. So RID1 is the first respondent. But of course, this is rarely seen, as often the first few respondents are test data and excluded later on. Version, this is the published version number the respondent completed, and it starts at 1. And each time the survey is updated and published, the version is incremented by 1. Status, this records how the respondent exited the survey, with a 7, for example, meaning that they completed the survey, or a 16 meaning that they were screened out because the quotas had been reached. The full list of possible status values is available in the dictionary sheet. IP. This is the IP address, or more generally, an anonymized meta version of the IP address. HTTP URL. This is the original starting web link the respondent used to access the survey. Session. This is a global, unique session ID used to track respondents through the survey. It should correspond directly to the RID. This is used for system auditing, as it's unique across all surveys rather than the RID, which is just a unique value within a survey. Start. This is the time when the respondent started in the Unix time format. This is the number of seconds since January the 1st, 1970, and can easily be converted into Excel or other time formats. Duration. This is the length of time in seconds the respondent spent in the survey until they completed, were screened out or timed out. And it may be empty if the respondent is still completing the survey. SRC. This is the name of the invitation link used and is useful for differentiating respondents by their source. EXTID. If the invitation link allowed the appending of a unique ID for the respondent, as is common with panel-managed recruitment, this value will appear here. All other fields are specific to the study, and generally there will be one column per data label. But when a survey element generates multiple data points, for example with a matrix or multiple choice question, each independent value or variable will have its own column with the naming specified in the dictionary. This data now can be filtered and analysed like any other data in Excel or loaded into your favourite analysis package. Next, we move to the page timestamps file. This data file contains the time each page was displayed to the respondent and also the time it was submitted. The units are seconds since starting the survey. And using the difference between display and submit time, the time spent on each page can be calculated. Alternately, the difference between the submit and the next page display time is the time it took the server to process and transmit the respondent data. This is usually negligible. Next, we move on to the choice experiment data. And for reasons of compactness, redundancy, and consistency, data from each choice experiment is in a separate file. And while for small studies with one choice experiment, it may have been feasible to combine all this data, for projects with multiple choice experiments, the number of rows and columns would be unfeasibly large and would not be readable in some older versions of SPSS and Excel. And for this reason, each choice experiment has its own data file. In this file, there's one row per respondent per scenario. So in a choice experiment with 8 scenarios, there will be 8 rows per respondent. All choice experiment data has the same 4 metadata fields at the beginning. Firstly, RID, the respondent ID, which can be linked to the other data files. Then we have the design row, and this is the absolute design row of the experimental design that was used to generate the scenario on this row. Next, we have the scenario field, and this is the scenario number, starting from 1, that was the strict order the researcher placed the scenario in the survey. After this, we have the SEQ, or sequence variable. This is closely related to the scenario number, but it's the sequence order starting from 1. And this is the order in which the respondent saw this scenario. Now, this may be the same as the scenario, but in the case of randomization or in some sort of custom branching or looping, the sequence in which the respondent saw the scenario may be different from the order it was placed within the survey. Following these fields are the response fields, also known as the dependent variables. Normally, there'll only be one field, pref1, and this is the alternative selected by the respondent. But in studies with multiple responses, such as in a full rank ordering of alternatives or in a best worst, there'll be one column per response. After the response variables are the experiment attribute levels for that scenario. And while these should match the experimental design for the design row, they're included here to aid with modeling, but also as auditable data connecting what was shown to the respondent with the responses given. So I hope you have a better understanding of how to export data from SurveyEngine. Thanks for listening.